This incident occurred back in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. At that time, I was 16 years old, out deer hunting with my dad and one of his friends, Frank. This day is etched in my memory as if it happened yesterday, and while I can't recall the exact dialogue, the essence of the story remains entirely accurate. My dad and I had a few different deer stands spread across an area of approximately 3/4 of a square mile. My dad had been hunting in this area for over a decade, and I had been tagging along since I was 5. Up until the age of 12, the legal age to hunt with a rifle, I had merely accompanied him. On this particular morning, we walked to my stand first. It was around 5 a.m., still dark outside. I settled into my spot while my dad and Frank proceeded to our other 2 stands, situated over a ridge about 500 yards away. Sitting alone in the darkness always gave me a slightly eerie feeling. Not long after my dad and Frank had left, I noticed a flashlight coming from the direction they had gone, roughly 200 yards away, and it seemed to be heading my way. I assumed they might have forgotten something at the truck or needed to return for some reason, so I radioed them to inquire. "We're in my stand, and Frank is heading to the other one," my dad replied. This flashlight belonged to someone else, and this wasn't uncommon. It didn't strike me as a big deal. These woods could get crowded during hunting season, and there was a parking spot in that general direction. To alert the approaching hunter to my presence, I turned on my light. The person with the flashlight stopped, and I saw the light change direction, moving away from me. It seemed like a minor incident, so I eventually dozed off while it was still dark. When I woke up, the sun was already up, around 8 a.m. I sat there for a while and decided to radio my dad to inquire whether they had seen or heard any activity. They hadn't observed anything yet, just a couple of distant gunshots. I got up and went for a slow walk to get my blood moving, venturing about 30 yards out and back while trying to remain as silent as possible. Upon returning to my stand and scrutinizing the surroundings, I noticed something unusual out to my left, the direction where I had previously seen the flashlight. There was an orange presence. For those unfamiliar, hunters are required to wear blaze orange during the hunting season. I contacted my dad and Frank to inquire if either of them was moving around, and my dad said no. Frank didn't respond. My attention was focused on the individual in orange, who was looking at me through the scope of a rifle, aiming it directly at me. This was a significant violation of a crucial rule we learned in hunter's education. Never point your rifle at something you don't intend to shoot. Unfortunately, some people still disregard this rule. Normal protocol dictates the use of binoculars in such situations. My initial thought was, what a jerk. However, even though I was looking directly at him, he didn't lower his gun. Panic started to set in as I worried I might become the next victim of a hunting accident. I slowly reached for my rifle, stood up, and stayed hidden behind as many trees as possible while walking down a small path to the side of my stand. My stand was situated on a knoll on the side of a much larger hill. I radioed my dad and informed him of the situation, and he advised me to remain hidden and out of sight. However, as a 16-year-old, I couldn't resist checking on the situation. Every time I peeked out, the guy still had his rifle aimed in my direction, but he had moved to a different location, like he had shifted about 30 yards from where he was the last time I looked. About 10 minutes passed in this nerve-wracking fashion when my dad radioed me, asking how I was doing. Looking back, it was clear he was trying to keep me calm, but at the time, I thought he wasn't taking me seriously. I reported that the guy was still there, constantly moving around, and I didn't know what was going on with him. My dad advised me to stay hidden, and he would be coming up near my location in a minute or two. That's when I heard the shot. I panicked, trying to reach my dad on the radio. Had he been shot? Where was he? Did he have to shoot the guy? What was happening? I sat there for what felt like hours, but was likely only 2 minutes. Finally, my dad said, "All right, come on out," and head toward my stand. I peered over the little knoll I was behind and spotted my dad waving from along the ridge where the stranger had been. I made my way over to him to find out what had occurred. As it turned out, Frank had been feeling restless and decided to take a stroll, unbeknownst to him, ending up on the other side of the same ridge where the stranger was. Frank had accidentally knocked his radio battery loose while getting situated earlier that morning and was unaware of the unfolding situation. The shot I had heard was Frank shooting a deer. My dad explained that as soon as Frank fired, the stranger walked away from us and toward the logging road. After helping Frank with his deer, we decided to call it an early day. Although I was extremely nervous, the remainder of the week passed without any further incidents. In the early 80s, when I was 8 years old, my family was visiting my uncle who lived in the backwoods of Missouri. He resided on a large piece of land, and the only other residents on the street were relatives. It was unusual for outsiders to be in the area. Consequently, no one bothered to lock their doors because extended family members frequently dropped by for various reasons. One night, during our visit, my parents, along with my aunt and uncle, decided to go to a nearby town for bowling. For some inexplicable reason, bowling was on the agenda. My brothers, aged 11 and 12, my female cousins, 6 and 14, and I, also female, stayed home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but a sudden heavy rainstorm quickly enveloped the area, plunging us into darkness. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in the dark house, but we cleverly called it vampire. There was a thin little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night. So, the person who was it would lie on the mattress, fold themselves over like a coffin, and count down to midnight. When they got to midnight, they would go looking for you again. All of the lights were off, and you tried to make it back to the coffin before you got caught. Because the house was in the countryside, it was pitch black at night. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. What this meant for the game was that you couldn't tell where the vampire was looking, so you just had to make a break for it. And if you were extremely lazy, and I'm sure by now, you can guess which one of us met those standards, you could hide in the living room with the coffin and get to base quickly. Ben, my 11-year-old brother, was it, and was doing the normal countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet from him. As he was counting, there was a flash of lightning. I don't know if I was already looking at the living room window or if the lightning made me look, but with the backlight of the lightning, I saw a man with his face against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face, as if he were trying to peer in, and looked exactly like the stereotypical creepster, heavyset, scraggly beard, etc. I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. Immediately, I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw. But then Ben sternly whispered, "If anyone is hiding in here, stay still." I sort of croaked out, "I'm here," right as there was another flash of lightning. The creeper was still there, but was no longer trying to look in the window. Instead, he was now looking toward the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where he was standing, the creeper was probably only 5 feet from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Ben leaped over the couch and locked the door just as the creeper started trying the handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided that it was best to let the creeps know that people were home, and that we knew he was there because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on the lights in the house. This is going to sound weird, but I was too terrified to panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to know and tell me what to do. He told me to go lock the other doors and was yelling for everyone else to come out and lock all of the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are hazy in my mind. I remember everything up until this point extremely clearly, and then I remember the end very clearly. But I'm less clear about the middle. I know that I locked the side door and then the sliding glass door at the back of the house. When we've talked about it over the years, some people remember us seeing him out the back door as well. I don't think I remember that. What I recall is locking the sliding glass door and standing there frozen, hearing Ben in a very calm but firm voice say, "Close the curtain. Listen to me, okay? Close the curtain." So I did. Ben can't remember that part, and I just remember my fear in Ben's voice, so I'm not sure if I saw the creeper in the backyard or not. We tried to call the police, but my aunt and uncle had a stupid party line, and it wouldn't work. Whether from the storm or from a neighbor leaving it off the hook or whatever. For the record, they are the only people I've ever known with a party line, so this wasn't normal to me either. But for those of you who don't know what that is, in really rural areas, multiple people on the street would share a phone line. It would have different rings for different households, but you could pick up the phone and listen to your neighbor's conversation. We also tried to summon help on my uncle's CB radio, but couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter, so he had a gun rack full of rifles in his room. But my older cousin was on an out-of-town hunting trip and took them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. I vividly remember Ben putting me on phone duty and Scott, my older brother, on CB duty, while he stood watch at the little square window on the front door with the BB gun. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back. He's coming up the driveway." The rest of us froze in fear, but Ben opened the front door, stepped out on the porch, pointed the gun, and said, "Get out of here right now." Then we hear our cousin Kyle, who lived down the road a bit, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remember that we felt like we had been saved when he showed up. Kyle seemed skeptical of our story, like we were playing a trick on him, even though we had no idea that he was coming. But he stayed with us until our parents came home. Honestly, I don't remember if we even told our parents what happened when they got home. There was no police involvement, though. We just went on with our trip, but we never played vampire again without some mention of that night. This happened a few years ago when I was a new mother, staying at home with my firstborn child. He was only a couple of weeks old, and I needed to get an oil change and tire rotation for my car. Instead of sitting in the dealership waiting room for over an hour, I thought it would be a good opportunity to explore the nearby arboretum. I had been to the arboretum a few times before, but this time I noticed a sign for Patriot's Path, a paved trail extending 35 miles throughout the county, divided into segments separated by roads or neighborhoods. I had frequented other parts of the path and never felt uncomfortable. It was a pleasant way to connect with nature, while occasionally encountering fellow exercise enthusiasts. Without hesitation, I decided to walk the path to pass the time. I was excited to explore this new section. Initially, the path cut through tall grasses, then it curved and led into a wooded area. This didn't concern me, since all the other parts of the trail I'd experienced were exclusively in the woods. As I pushed my newborn in a stroller, relishing my time in nature, I came to a fork in the path. The other parts of the trail I'd visited were always single paths with no forks. The right path was on higher ground, so I headed in that direction. However, as I proceeded, the path became increasingly difficult for the stroller. Tree roots disrupted the path, making it a rough ride for my baby, and I couldn't maintain my previous pace. Since I was moving significantly slower, I checked my map app to see if it included this path and where it would lead us. According to the map, the left side of the fork followed a waterway, so I decided to try that route. As I turned around, I noticed a well-dressed man slowly strolling towards us. I maneuvered the stroller free from the tree roots and started walking towards him. He held his phone up to his face as if he were on a call, but he wasn't speaking. As we got closer, I looked at him to offer a friendly nod as I usually did when passing people on the path. However, he just stared straight ahead with an expressionless face. As I processed this interaction, my gut told me something was amiss. He was dressed in a business casual outfit, whereas most people on the trails wore exercise clothes. He wasn't engaged in conversation on his phone, which he held up to his ear, and his other hand was concealed behind his back as if he were hiding something. I turned to take the other path at the fork, but convinced myself I was overthinking it. After walking a bit more, I could hear the sound of babbling water. According to my map app, I should have seen the waterway by then, and the path should have opened up to a parking lot. I felt like we should have reached the parking lot by now. When I tried opening my map again, my phone wasn't working. I was in the woods, alone with my baby, without phone access, and after a strange interaction, it was time to turn around and leave the woods. To my dismay, I encountered the same man again. His face remained expressionless, his phone still at his ear, but he wasn't talking. His other hand was still concealed behind his back. My heart sank into my stomach, and my stomach jumped into my throat. Why had he turned around on the first part of the path? Why did he choose the same fork? He was close enough to us for me to realize he must have turned around shortly after we did, indicating he had seen us turn down the other path. All the alarms in my body were ringing. When we needed to pass him, I began to jog. After all, I was dressed appropriately for a trail that most people used for exercise. Maybe I intended to jog the whole time. I didn't stop jogging until I was out of the woods and in the tall grass. I turned to look behind me, and luckily, my son and I were alone again. We waited in the dealership waiting room for the rest of the time they worked on my car. I did return to the Arboretum afterward, but I never ventured down that section of the trail again. Now, perhaps that was just an ordinary businessman, and nothing happened between me and him. Maybe nothing was going to happen. However, I'd rather go for an unplanned jog than ignore my gut feeling and find out.